Should NASCAR teams have a common paint scheme like Formula One teams do? NASCAR and their teams have a massive brand identity problem. There's currently no connection with drivers, their sponsors, the paint schemes, and the fans. Fans have a hard time recognizing what cars are on track, and it's not like years past. In the early 2000s, you could look at a car based on the paint scheme and the sponsor, you immediately knew who that was. Napa, Michael Waltrip, Dale Jr., Budweiser, Steve Park, Pennzoil, Jeff Green, AOL, things like that. Jeff Gordon, DuPont, Terry Labonte, Kellogg's, you knew who they were just based on the paint scheme alone. Now you see a car on track and you're like, I think that's William Byron. I'm not 100% sure though. Or I think that's Austin Dillon, but I don't know which pharmaceutical company is on the hood of that car this week because there seem to be a ton. But something NASCAR massively lacks is the amount of brand identity and how much fans can connect with a certain driver, car, or even team. Jeff Gordon spoke about it this week, saying that NASCAR and their teams need to work together and try to figure out how to build brand identity around each team. And I think when he mentioned each team, it was more in the gist of each car as their own team, not necessarily like Hendrick Motorsports or Joe Gibbs Racing, but around like the 24 car and the 5 car and the 9. So like if that driver leaves or retires, there's brand identity there. And we've kind of seen that with the 24 car, a little bit with the 3 car. I know people don't like Austin Dillon, but there is a ton of brand value in that number 3 and at the 43 as well, now to a lesser extent with how, poor they've ran in the last 20 years. But at the end of the day, NASCAR and their teams lack a big amount of brand identity. And I think one solution for that is to go to a common paint scheme. And Team Penske tried this just a few years ago, like 5 years ago. They took Joey Logano's Shell Pennzoil standard looking paint scheme and they just changed the colors around. But you knew who it was. At the time, fans called it boring. They called it lazy. It's the Penske perfect way, right? Nothing fun can happen. But at the same time, you knew who those cars were. You saw that paint scheme, that Shell paint scheme out there, and you knew who it was, regardless if it was Freightliner or AAA or whoever else was on the car. You knew based on that paint scheme, and regardless of the colors, that it was a Penske car. So they didn't necessarily build a value around the car per se and the team, but more so rather Team Penske as a whole. You knew it was a Penske car. And Joey Logano ran that paint scheme for a few years and they had all of their different sponsors basically run that paint scheme just in different color variations. Ryan Blaney did the same thing as well. He ran that paint scheme, different colorways for he and his sponsors, but you knew who it was based off of that paint scheme alone. So that's a little bit drastic. I don't know if you're going to get NASCAR teams on board because every sponsor wants to have a unique looking car, right? They want to have some sort of say in the design, which is different than what Formula One has, right? Formula One teams have a bunch of different sponsors, but they all just adhere to what the brand design and the brand guidelines are for that team. When you look at Ferrari and they have UPS and Shell on the car, those are 2 colors that clash very much. Doesn't matter though, because they're just going to go on the red car. You can say that you want to have a brown car. You can say that you want to have a yellow car for Shell. Doesn't matter. You're going on a red car. You look at Aston Martin and all of their sponsors. Doesn't matter. They just become white, different color sponsors on this green car. Same with McLaren. All of McLaren sponsors adhere to what the Papaya brand guidelines are. And every other team. They just adhere to what it is. And in NASCAR, they bend over backwards, which is fine because that's how you end up getting this sale, right? Getting this bit of sponsorship is to let them design their own car. But then when you do that, it takes away from the brand identity. Gone are the days of 36 race sponsorship, and in are the days of having 6 to 10 different primaries throughout the year. When you look at William Byron's car, the number 24 with Jeff Gordon, everybody always knew that it was going to be DuPont. And then when he left DuPont, it was Drive to End Hunger. And then you'd have a Pepsi race mixed in every now and then, a Nicorette race maybe as well. But you basically knew who it was going to be on the car. And that number 24 car is something we'll get back to in just a second here in terms of its number identity. But now when you look at William Byron, you see that he has Raptor, Exalta, Liberty University, Valvoline, Relay, and maybe a few others as well. Pods, which is going to be on the car here at the end of the 2023 season, and they all have different colored numbers on them, all different paint schemes, and you're kind of wondering like, I know it's William Byron, but like, is it William Byron this weekend? It's hard to tell. So that's something that they definitely need to look at, is having a common paint scheme. And we've actually seen some teams try this a little bit in the past. Jeff Gordon and his team did it back in the 2000s as well. They just took that flame paint scheme that DuPont ran all the time, and they just turned it into a Nicorette paint scheme, or they turned it into a Pepsi paint scheme, or a National Guard paint scheme as well. And it worked out really well because you knew those flames, you knew that Dayglow 24, that was Jeff Gordon. And now we lack a lot of that identity. And if teams won't agree to a standard paint scheme, which obviously is going to be a hard sell for your sponsors, having a standard brand identifiable number with a color is definitely the way to go. You knew when you saw that 24 car, that Dayglow yellow 24 on the side of the car, that was Jeff Gordon. Same with Jimmie Johnson. When it was that Dayglow 48, you knew it was Jimmie Johnson. I know later in his career. At the end of the day, same with the 5 car Terry Labonte. They've always done a really good job of having brand identifiable numbers and brand equity built around that number. And now when you look at the 24 car, it's white, it's black, it's red, it's yellow. There's too many different variations of it. You can kind of take Kyle Larson, for example. You know that 5 car and the font that it's used, white, that's Kyle Larson in that 5 car now. And Dale Earnhardt had the same thing with the 3 car. You knew that that slanted number 3 in white, that was Dale Earnhardt. And it never changed outside of very rarely when they had a really special paint scheme or a different sponsor on the car, would that number potentially even change? And I think that's something teams need to look at now, is you need to have a standard color for that number, standard design, and they basically all have the same design. They're not changing the design of the number, but a standard colorway. That way it's identifiable on any paint scheme that it's on. You slap that Dayglow 24 on the side of any paint scheme, you're like, oh, it's Jeff Gordon. You slap the 48 on it, you knew it was Jimmie Johnson. Now it's like, well, you know, it's not as identifiable. There's not that much brand equity behind it. And I think it's something that teams desperately need to take a look at as they try to build up this brand identity behind what they're doing. Fans flooded my comments on TikTok talking about the ratings being down and what's wrong with NASCAR. And a ton of them specifically cited the lack of attachment that they have to drivers now. They said that NASCAR lacks star power. All of the good stars are gone. All of the big time stars are gone. And I think a part of that is because they were so drawn into who these drivers were and how identifiable their cars were. Again, you knew the 24, you knew the 8, you knew the 20, you knew the 88 of Dale Jr. or the 8, whatever number he was going to be in, the 3. You knew who all these guys were based on that number alone and the way that the number looked. Sure, towards the end of their careers there, most of them had multiple different sponsorships and it was a little bit up in the air in terms of like identifiable paint schemes, but you always knew who was in that number. And now I don't think we do enough of a job marketing these drivers specifically with their numbers to create that brand identity between driver, number, and then to the fans. And it's something they need to take a look at going forward. So hopefully that's something NASCAR takes a look at. Let me know in the comments, do you think that this is something they should look at, a common paint scheme that is, or at least a common color number way for the car? I think it's a step in the right direction. You're never going to get a 36 race sponsor to come in, and it's never going to be as identifiable as it once was. But I think having a common paint scheme, or at the very least a common number with a same color each and every week for 37, 38 straight weeks is the way to go. And you can make exceptions in the off chance that like a sponsor's like, oh, I'm not going to do this, or if you're doing a throwback or something like that. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's something that they desperately need to look at going forward. So let me know in the comments what you think. Like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on TikTok @BreakHard, Instagram and Twitter @BreakHardBlog.